Welcome to part 2 of the conversation with Meylin Allen and Jordanne Howell-Walton, who are both graduates of Andrews University. Part 1 was released as episode 18 of Andrews Speaks, the podcast of Andrews University. That portion of the conversation focused on the Peace March they co-organized, which had the goal of raising awareness about racism. To access part 1, go to andrews.edu/podcasts or see the link in the description below this video. Now in part 2, Meylin and Jordanne address 2 final questions. First, they reflect on what it means to be a world changer at Andrews University. And second, they share what they hope Adventists will do in response to the call for racial justice and healing. In addition to the audio conversation with Jordanne and Meylin, in this video, you'll also be watching footage from the Peace March that took place on June 7, 2020, right here in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. So Andrews University, we have this motto or tagline, world changers made here. So as you're sharing about what you're doing and the conversations that you're creating, the safe space to have these conversations and seeing why this is needed, not just here in Berrien Springs, but this is a widespread need. And so I'm thinking of your trajectory, your life's experiences that obviously start well before you're on campus for Andrews University, but thinking specifically of your time here, how do you relate to this line of world changers made here, of what you're exemplifying? How did university life, how did studying here support or nurture this leadership that you're demonstrating and as you're talking about future plans? How can you connect Andrews to this story?
For me, I think it was not necessarily the curriculum I had here, but some of the relationships I created in my time here. I think that's what really pushed me. So I studied education and I studied math. Well, in the math department, I was mostly worried about math because math.
Right.
So, but in the education department, they definitely are one of the best departments in our state. At least that's what my superintendent told me. And so they prepared me very well to be excellent at my job. But when I started teaching, I noticed that it wasn't enough to be excellent at teaching math. I noticed that that's not why I was there, and that's not what God had called me for, and that wasn't my purpose at that school. And I had to shift gears, and I had to stop spending so much time trying to create these perfect lesson plans because there were students that needed me to advocate for them at that school. Was I prepared to start this Gender Sexuality Alliance or this Black Student Association? Absolutely not. But because of the relationships that I built here at Andrews, I was able to talk to some of the people that I knew were activists, and I was able to ask them for help, and I was able to bring people in, and I was able to do my own research and know that just because I went to college doesn't mean I'm done learning, right? Learning happens all the time. So it's a complicated question. Do I feel like Andrews made me a world changer? No, I feel like I am a world changer by nature.
Awesome.
But do I feel like they prepared me well? Absolutely. And the connections I made here, because we're so diverse, were helpful for the work that I had to do. And I had to stir up the waters and make some, make people shake them up a little bit. That was my work at my particular school, and that's how I was a world changer there. I had to make people uncomfortable to be a world changer there and to start seeing at least the initiative of some change taking place. Did I learn in one of my classes, like when you get to a school and you see a problem, shake it up. No. No, I didn't. But they did give me the confidence I needed to know that I was great and I was prepared. And they did give me the tools, and the people here in the community here did make me feel safe to be able to do something at a school. Because mind you, Berrien Springs High School is very close to Andrews University, just a couple minutes away. So
about a 20-minute walk on Sunday.
So definitely. So that question is kind of like, because what do you define as a world changer? And does that really happen to everyone? And is everyone's experience at Andrews like that? I don't know. Did everyone read all their textbooks that their professor assigned?
No.
I don't know. But see, I did. And that's why I learned so much and I was so confident. You know what I mean? So everything I think is up to the individual. It's what you want to make out of your experience. And it's how much, especially in learning and education, like the more work you put into it, the more you read, the more you get out. You know what I mean? I had friends that were taking the same classes as me. Until this day, they didn't gain as much knowledge as I did in the classes because I asked so many questions and I tried to get all of the information out of my professors. I was like, give me your brain. So, and that's what I did, right? So I learned a lot, but it wasn't everyone's experience.
I know that was a loaded question, so thank you for unpacking that in some of those ways. Jordanne, you were gonna respond.
I think for me, being part of the behavioral science department, there is no point in time where, like Dr. Burnett sits us down and says, this is how you're going to change the world.
It just doesn't happen.
However, I do feel as if Andrews created many environments that grew my leadership experience. I know, going to high school here, I do feel like I was given the leg up. I had an advantage coming into Andrews. People already knew my face in the community. And from the jump, like freshman year, I know like Emily Carlson sought me out and was like, hey, come work for Student Life. But Emily Carlson for sure was one of the people that really grew my leadership ability. She continued to keep me engaged and not only working in Student Life, but being a part of AUSA. And one thing I really do appreciate about her is that she would frequently allow me to walk into her office and have uncomfortable conversations.
Quite a compliment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She'd always have those like peanut butter chocolate granola bars because that was like my bait. And I'd go in to get one and she'd ask some question that would lead to me sitting there for almost an hour and saying, this is how I feel and this makes me uncomfortable. And I think Andrews could be so much more, but we have to have this uncomfortable conversation. And that meant so much for me because I was scared to give my opinion because, I'm just a student. I'm just a student worker. I clock in, you can take my hours away, but she always gave room for me to say exactly how I was feeling. And that I think very much aided in me wanting to be a leader further on campus. I think for me, there's a problem with that slogan though.
Okay.
World changers made here. And I think Meylin kind of touches on it, what's a world changer? And I think when you're 18, you come in with this idea that the world is huge and I have to change the whole world. I have to work for the UN. I have to, be a politician. And that's not reality. I'm not saying you can't do it, but that's not real.
Furthermore, that's not realistic. Like when you are a world changer, you very much so have to choose what part of the world you're going to change. Like you can't change all the systems. You have to narrow it down and say, okay, God has gifted me with this skill set and this passion, and this is what I'm working towards. And that doesn't mean that you're going to finish that work because you probably won't. And you might have to teach someone to finish it for you, but you can't change all of the world's problems.
But it's amazing how much you can do in your own community, in your own world, You're
saying if you localize it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jesus's ministry was 3.5 years and it was in one nuclear spot. But the amount of change that Jesus created, here we are thousands of years later, still living it, still trying to achieve what it is to be like Christ because of the change he made in his one nuclear environment. And it was small things, like we read a lot about miracles, but a lot of what Jesus did was they saw the person for who they were. And in seeing their vulnerability, in seeing who they were beyond the mistakes, he gave them so much validity that they wanted change. And the change that happened there allowed them to change their community further and further. It's a domino effect.
I have a question for you.
Oh boy.
Because you said, no, because I'm thinking about this in terms of like grades. So you said that challenging people to be world changers is like a big thing, and they need to understand they can change their community. Well, is it necessarily wrong to have people dream big? So for example, when I was studying, I very much so always wanted a 4.0. Did I graduate with a 4.0? No, I was a couple tenths away. But I always strive to get 100 on every test. And I was like, okay, if I strive for the 100, then I'm gonna hit somewhere in the A, and so I'm gonna be okay, you know? And so do you think it's okay to tell everyone to strive to be a world changer, even though they might not necessarily change the world and they might just change their community? Do you think that the problem exists that they're not saying it's okay to only change your community, and their expectation is for the whole world, and therefore making you feel like you're not qualified to change your community, or that's not enough?
I first would like to say that we shouldn't underestimate how much a community is, and how much value and how much change can occur in a community. And we saw that happen, you know, on June 7th. Our community, as far as we knew, was going to be, you know, our friends and these students, maybe 200 people. And that was us thinking on the high end.
Wow.
You know, 1,500 people showed up. And they said, I'm part of this community. I'm part of this dialogue. I'm part of this change. I think that we need to do more in having the conversation of, what is your world? What part of the world do you want to change? Yeah. Because you know what? Like, they tell you that corny quote when you like graduate from 8th grade, shoot for the moon and you'll land amongst the stars.
Yeah. I lived by that my whole academic education. I was like, I'm shooting for the moon forever.
But you know, the reality is we shouldn't discredit those stars because they're equally of value. You know, I'm so sure, you know, that there are a lot of our teachers who, when they are educating us, are not thinking to themselves, wow, you know, like that person's going to be the president of the United States. But they're probably thinking to themselves, that kid is special and they have something worth sharing. And I don't know who they're going to affect or what community they're going to affect, but I can see how they are going to affect someone for the better. And I think for me, a lot of things are in the small things, you know. It's in giving a person a space to be who they are, genuinely, 100%. Because giving them an environment where they are safe, the environment that you gave to the Black students at Berrien Springs, that brought forth this march because they felt safe, because you changed your community, because you created a safe space in your classroom where they could fully be who they are, where they could cry, where they could scream. They have come to the courage to say, I cannot be silent in my own space anymore. My voice has to be heard. And you have changed your community by doing that. And I mean, I've met your students, and I'm convinced some of them are going to change the world.
Oh, absolutely. They're absolutely phenomenal. I love each and every one of them. Thank you very much.
You know, and in that way, you've become a world changer. You have equipped so many students with the courage to say, I cannot be idle any longer. And that makes a huge difference. So again, don't discredit how a small community can genuinely affect so many.
So do you think, I agree with you 100%, just putting that out there. Do you think that, what other phrase do you think Andrews could use that would reflect what you're saying? Because I see that what you're saying, when people see world changer, they feel like that's not attainable, right? And so could there be something tagged along to that phrase, or can there be another way to explain it or to say it where people can feel like they can actually achieve that?
You know, my first answer is the most, you know, applicable. Freshman orientation, we'll just, you know, add a definition. I was a freshman who did not go to freshman orientation. So maybe, you know, like that's not it. But it's a matter of furthering the conversation. Because you can be a world changer. There's no doubt about it. But where are you going to change the world? What do you consider the world to be? Right. Why do you want to change the world? And I think sometimes when we enter into a learning environment, we're so focused on attaining one thing, we lose out on the life lessons that go along with it, you know? Like, I'm glad I got my degree, don't get me wrong. I spent a lot of times at that department. I was there, you know, sometimes till 2 a.m, but it was also in that department that a lot of my professors gave me life lessons that I still hold on to today. Mm-hmm. And so I know, you know, like Dr. Bailey and Dr. Burnett used to come and sit with us in the department and tell us about their experience in college and their experience in high school. I remember when the It Is Time video came out, and I went to Dr. Burnett and I said, Dr. Burnett, I don't understand. Am I an outlier because I don't identify with this one Black experience? Am I not Black? Do I not fit in? And Dr. Burnett sat down with me and said, you know what? When I was your age, that was very much my experience. And I questioned who I was. And that was one of the most vulnerable conversations that he had with me that helped me to further create my self-identity and my self-perception. Because he said, you know what? You don't have to be the stereotype of Black. You don't have to agree with what everybody else is saying for you to be who you are. You're Black, period. Your skin is brown. You can't change that. But you can change what it is to be Black for you, you know? And that was, you know, one of the life lessons that I hold on to and I value to this day. But Andrews has an opportunity to further the conversation of what it is to change the world. And it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. It doesn't have to be this, you know, grand scheme where we get an award or we're put in a magazine.
Right.
It can
have to be fame.
Exactly. It can be something as small as affirming someone who's in need.
And you know what? I think it's also important to add on to that you won't always see the change that you make in the world.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
And you can't expect to, you know what I mean, on your deathbed, think back and say, look at all of this change I made. Some people make the most change when they die. For example, George Floyd.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? True. He was a world changer, but what did he know that he was going to be a world changer? He didn't. And so I think that's important to let people know that do your best at everything that you do. Acknowledge all of your skill sets, use your talents, and do the best that you can and be as helpful as you can. And that will cause change, but don't worry about that change. Yeah. You do not need to put that on your resume that you changed the world. Just do your best and you will change the world, because that's just what God called you to do.
Such a good discussion, breakdown of what that means, world changers made here, and what it can mean. So turning a corner now, I want us to think, I want to spend a little time thinking about responses to racial injustice. Because right now in this time, you know, our nation is focusing on injustice, racial injustice. So what do you hope Adventists will do to engage? What do you hope Andrews will do to engage? Maybe that's a place for us to wrap up this conversation of what do you hope to see?
I'll be completely honest. My hope is that the Adventist Church would respond in a way that was ground shaking, in which our foundation of being comfortable was dismantled, in which voice was given to the sister and brother who have been silenced for so long. But I genuinely feel no matter how hard, how aggressively I hope for that, I am expecting of nothing. And it's even heartbreaking for me to say that right now. Wow. I am byproduct of the Adventist Church. I was born into the Adventist Church. My parents converted at 16. I have known nothing other than Adventist education. And no matter how deeply I am involved in this community and in this subculture, there is still a part of me that knows I am not represented and that I am not heard. And I think that more so speaks towards the worldwide Adventist Church, and it hurts. And one thing that my parents always told me is that Christianity is not comfortable. And they reminded me of that so frequently when I would debate, you know, do I do the right thing or do I leave it alone because I don't want to be uncomfortable? And they would say, Jordanne, Christianity is not comfortable. And so I would, you know, muster up what little courage I had to do the right thing because that's what needed to be done. And I feel as if we have reached a place in Adventism where we're okay with comfortable and we're okay being complacent. And we distance ourselves from the problem. And we say, this doesn't affect me right here, right now, because I may not look like you, because I'm okay where I am. But the reality is the people that you call your brother and sister are breaking. We are beyond our breaking point. The fact that I work with children who are 4 or 5 years old, and they are so aware of the fact that because they look different from each other, one of their classmates is going to experience a way different pain than they will ever know. The fact that 4-year-olds in my class have said out loud, you don't have the right to be unkind to them because you look different, says to me that we are not going above and beyond to do our part in creating an equal space at the table for this conversation because we're so focused on being comfortable. And so while everything within me would love to see a change, while my heart is yearning for a turn to come and for, there to be an emphasis and a focus on the fact that the Adventist Church is not fully looking into the reality of social justice, and not just for Black Adventists. If we claim to have the truth, we should be on the forefront of change. And it's not in our own community. It's not just addressing George Floyd. It's the reality of what is happening at the border that we're ignoring. It's the reality of why are Native Americans dying at such an extreme rate because of COVID, and we're staying silent. We're comfortable, and that's not okay. And so, as we were saying, maybe I can't change the whole world, but what can we do in our community to cause change? Mm-hmm. And a lot of it starts with a conversation. And even more so what Meylin was saying before, a lot of it is self-analyzation. Why does this make me uncomfortable? Why am I okay with being silent? Mm-hmm. Why do I not address the fact that this person that I claim as my friend is hurting and I'm ignoring their pain because I don't know it? Why am I okay with not being empathetic to their reality? Why can I go on continuing to live my comfortable life and seeing other people's pain? And a lot of times we're not taught to analyze those questions and to think about it. But I think that conversation can start here. It can happen on our campus. We can continue the narrative of saying, why are you okay with this? How is it Christ-like for you to see someone else's pain and ignore it? Where is the Christianity in that? And one thing my parents would always say is, taking God's name in vain is not saying, oh my God. It's claiming to be a Christian and not acting Christ-like. Mm. And I think we have reached a place where our comfort has outweighed our Christianity. But I do believe that in our town, and I think it's so important that it be Andrews, we have an opportunity to take the forefront, to be the voice, to say, as an Adventist institution, we are not asking for change, we are demanding change. We have to be better. It's not an option anymore. There shouldn't be a reality where we look on social media and so many signs say, am I next? That shouldn't be a question that people are asking. We demand better, and we have more than the manpower, to be the voice of change, is kind of how I feel right now.
I think, I agree with everything you say, but my experience as an Adventist has been different because prior to coming to Andrews, I attended a very small Hispanic church. And what does it feel like to be part of a small Hispanic church? It feels like when you go to these big camp meetings, you're in the small room without AC. Mm-hmm. It feels like everyone else has a snack provided. You have to bring your own food, So as a Hispanic, and I was a daughter of undocumented immigrants, which they're not anymore, so don't be calling people. So if Hispanics, I find, are a lot of times afraid to speak up for themselves, to say they don't acknowledge that they too deserve some of the rights that other people here in the United States have. And that was very apparent even in my church. So I wish that our church as a whole was a safe space, like my classroom was for BSA, where we could have these conversations and we could express our hurt and we could cuss if we needed to, if that was the best way to let it out. And it was a safe space. We understood where it was coming from. We weren't pointing fingers at each other. I wish my church was a reflection of what we want to see in this country. I wish that things like this didn't exist. I wish that I didn't feel less than because I was part of this Hispanic church than you who were part of the white church, the big church. You know, I wish people at my Hispanic church didn't say, oh, those Black people aren't going to heaven because of the way they worship. I wish those things weren't there. I wish we worked within ourselves to create a space where we're safe and we have these conversations and we grow and we become an example to the nation of what it would look like to be inclusive and diverse, because we are inclusive and diverse and we have churches all over the world. So why do we here in the United States not reflect that? There are, and remember, I'm from a small minority town. There are churches that speak Spanish. There are churches that are Brazilian churches, Asian churches, all these things. Why do we, at least it felt for me as a member of a small Hispanic church, that my church wasn't as good or good enough as the white, bigger churches. First of all, we didn't have the money, which is obvious. So you get the same thing that you would get in the education system, right? Higher taxes, bigger house, right? Better school. Same thing with the churches. Why is that the case? Why, because you're a smaller church, do you have to get the more inexperienced pastor? Why, because you are... So I guess in the Hispanic community, we have a lot of churches. So like if you go to the Dominican Republic, there's a church in every corner, an Adventist church in every corner.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's very prevalent there. And here, I know that my pastor for my church back home, he had 5 churches. So we would only ever see him maybe once a month, versus I would see my friends that go to white churches and their pastor preaches all the time. So they get better service. And I was like, that's not fair. Like, why is that happening? So I just wish, I see so much of the dysfunction in our nation, in our church. And I find that if we were true believers of Christ, this wouldn't be a problem. We would understand that Jesus would have sat down with me and had this conversation about race. And we would understand that if Jesus were the passenger and this cop was, being rude and not even being rude, being abusive, that's the correct term. Jesus wouldn't just sit there chilling and saying, this is not my problem. Yeah. We're not going to get into it. That's politics. You know, Jesus wouldn't have done that. Jesus would have been like, yo, police, you better chill out, okay? So I think that we are sometimes worse than what we see in the nation, because in the nation, at least in the United States, you can see it on the news. You can see what happens, especially down south. Like, people aren't hiding that they're racist. But in the church, it's like that Midwestern racism. I support you and I'm here for you. But they don't really show up and they don't show out, you know? And I wish that were different. I wish I could feel that my church would acknowledge who I was and would celebrate me and stand for me when I need it. Because I think a lot of the celebration of diversity comes when you stand with someone in a time of need. Like, it's cool if you say you like my food. A lot of Americans say they love Mexican foods, but then they hate the Mexicans and they want to ship them across the border and build a wall, you know? And so, cool, you like my culture, but a true celebration would be you standing with me and you saying that you're on my side and protecting me when I can't protect myself because I'm being marginalized. I don't know what other words exist to fill in the blank. Y'all know what I mean. Beautiful.
I think it's really heartbreaking that Adventism and Christianity are not synonymous. Sometimes we focus so much in the Adventist environment on maintaining our culture versus maintaining a Christ-like atmosphere. The Bible speaks so highly and so frequently of advocacy. And it's baffling to me that a church that claims to follow the Bible is not supporting advocacy. It's a juxtaposition at its finest. How can you say my 28 fundamental beliefs are biblical, but I'm not going to advocate for you because social justice is not my problem?
Right.
Because that's uncomfortable. Because that's not culturally acceptable. Jesus in and of himself was not culturally acceptable. It wasn't acceptable to walk into the temple and flip tables. It wasn't acceptable to stop Pharisees from stoning a woman caught in adultery, but Jesus did it nonetheless. And I think so frequently of that story where Jesus is crossing the sea and sees this man possessed by demons. And he asks the man, to the demons more specifically, what is your name? And they say, I am Legion. And Jesus casts the demons into the pigs, and the pigs go running off the cliff. And as opposed of the people of that city saying, Jesus, thank you for saving this man, because now he is valid. Now he can exist with us. Now he can worship with us. They chased Jesus out because Jesus removed what they considered valuable. And too many times, instead of the minority, instead of the person who is voiceless in our church being given the ability to worship and being part of our community, we say, Jesus, this is uncomfortable. How dare you make me uncomfortable? I want to be okay in my pew on my Saturday morning, and that's it. But being Christ-like, in my opinion, goes above and beyond the subculture of Adventism. Because at the end of the day, no one's asking you, what day did you go to church? No one is asking you, do you eat pork or not? How much do you love dinner roast? Do you eat haystacks? At the end of the day, Jesus is going to ask you, did you clothe those who are naked? Did you do unto them as you would do to me? And I don't know how many of us will be able to stand in his presence and to say yes, fully of confidence. And that to me is what is most scary. And that is what's most heartbreaking. Because, we strive every day. We work with kids and we strive to teach them to be like Christ. And we try to start this seed growing of how do I represent Christ? How do I mirror Christ daily? And it's hard in an environment where our Christianity is not mirrored in Adventism. And so we will have a cognitive dissonance in our environment, because do I follow the norm in my community, or do I follow a Christ-like standard? And I think that for me is what is so terrifying and so scary, is how many of us are following a Christ-like standard. And this time is a time just as good as any to say, my behavior is unacceptable and I have to do better. I cannot claim Christ, I cannot represent Christ and not do better. And so I think for me, I want to urge each person, to take the time to look at themselves and say, and to ask God to impose and to say, am I representing you? Am I depicting who you are and your character and how I live? And, it's not always going to be something on a grand scale. It's really small things that can impose and create change. But a lot of it is, saying, God, make my heart ready for change that I can represent you. And I don't know, how much of that is fostered in our communities. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something we have to strive for.
I think it's important to realize that the change starts with me. I'm not going to wait for my organization to do something and then I'm just going to piggyback and ride on that. Mm-hmm. If I see that they're not doing something and then I don't do something in return, now I'm at fault too. So the change starts with me. And when we talked about changing the world like we did earlier, which was the motto here at Andrews, we established that the change starts small and then it keeps on growing, right? So if you're at your local church and no one's saying anything and no one's doing anything, be the change that you want to see, and don't be afraid, because at the end of the day, that's what Jesus wants you to do. He's going to stand by you. And he never promised that this is going to be an easy adventure. You know what I mean? He never promised that you're not going to feel pain. He just promised to be there with you. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind too. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to go through traumatic situations. That's just going to happen. And you just need to know that you're not alone. And that those things are important. And it's part of making change. It's a roller coaster. It's up and down. There are so many times where I cried and I had to fight for things at my school to have change happen. And there's so many situations that I had to overcome with my students, and so many long nights that we spent. So it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And furthermore, it is our job here on earth to create that change and to make sure that we do our part in making this space safer and making people see Christ through us.
It's a beautiful place to wrap up. Thank you for this deep and vulnerable conversation. Really, really appreciate this time. Thank you, World Changers.